Hi everyone, this is the uh, February 28th SIG CLI meeting. Uh, Today we have several topics in the agenda. Let's start with the first one, kube control apply to control apply. Control apply.
Oh, hi. I guess that's me. How much time do I have for this?
Depends how many agenda we have.
Let's say try to bound yourself to 20 minutes, Daniel.
Wow. Okay, that'll be tough, but we'll try it. Okay. So a week or two ago, I sent around a. Yeah, thanks, Joe. I'll need the luck. A week or two, I sent around a document with a design for moving kube control apply to be a control plane function rather than a client function. So this week I'm making the rounds on various SIGs. I did SIG apps on Monday. I actually got it confused and thought that that was SIG CLI, but that was SIG apps, and I'm here today. So I actually have some slides that I can pop up and we can go through. Yeah, okay. Let's see. All right, can everyone see that? Oops, wrong way. Okay, so this is SIG CLI. So I have a background section here, but I'm guessing many, if not most of you, already know what kube control apply does. Please stop me if that's not true. So I'm going to skip right to why is kube control apply a good thing to have in the system. And this is I have three reasons for this. Allowing users to operate on and edit directly the types that are submitted to the API system. It lets them develop familiarity with the API system. It prevents them from having to go through like a two-step process where first you have to learn how to operate your config system, and then once you figure out how to get that to emit the config you want, then you have to figure out how to get the config to produce the object you want. The sort of vision behind kube control apply and declarative resource management in general is the user is editing only the fields they want. Some other system is also setting fields that it wants, and everything is composable and works together. The second reason is for integrators. Instead of having to integrate with an API per resource, per operation on that resource, they just have to learn one API. So you can imagine if this were written in gRPC, for example, you'd have a set replicas call, which like you have to go out and build a client, call the set replicas method. Here, you can apply a manifest that only has the replicas field, or you can use the sub resource. The idea is integrators have to make one integration point. And finally, this is the building block that enables Brian's declarative app management, which I'll send these slides around later. You can click on that link. It's a long document. But primarily, it describes a workflow where there's well, maybe not primarily, but the main workflow is users are using a source control management system. They put their config objects in there, and there's a number of overlays which are merged on the client side, and then that is submitted with kube control apply to the server side. So that's why it's good. We should also say, why is it bad? Why shouldn't you use it? I'm just opening up the chat so I make sure that I see the questions. Yes, kubectl apply does not merge overlays at the moment. This is, you'll see in non-goals in a second that this is a future extension. Um, so what is it not good for? It is not good for imperative commands. You should not use declarative principles to charge credit cards. You should not use them to launch missiles. You should not use them to open the pod bay doors. However, some imperative commands have reasonable declarative formulations. Like you can imagine a API object with pod bay door position equals, and it accepts either open or closed. Like that's a reasonable thing. You should not have a launched missiles true false, right? That's not a good paradigm. So why is it hard? It's hard because we are deducing user intent from the last thing they wanted and the thing they want now. I think actually you need an entire human brain to do this in the general case. So our API system is and possibly should be more restricted in some areas to enable this to be done correctly for our API objects. And I am not aware of any other system out there that does this particular thing. So that's why that's an overview of why it's hard. We'll have more specifics in a minute. So what is this? What are we trying to accomplish? Apply. The goal of the feature is to allow users and systems to cooperatively determine the desired state of an object. The goal for this design is that the control plane solves as many of the problems as it is reasonable for the control plane to solve. Specifically, some non-goals. I am not focusing on multi-object apply. That has to be implemented with a client-side loop for now. It may be possible to move parts of that into the server in the future, but that's left for future work. So today's proposal is just about the single object case. And honestly, you need a working single object case before you can think about the multi-object case anyway. I'm not providing an API that only performs merges. I think that we definitely need that in the future, potentially both two-way and three-way merges. And I think that it is proper for the control plane to do that and offer that as an API, but that's future work. It's not what I'm solving here. And finally, there's some sources of user confusion that really can't be fixed with code, or at least not with control plane code. And so 2 examples: if you change the name or the namespace of a resource on your disk and you reapply it, you get a new thing. It doesn't rename the old thing. This is because we use the name and the namespace to identify the thing that you're trying to change. This is sort of working as intended, so we need to figure out how to document and help users do the right thing. And there's also some user confusion where our API is unclear or maybe undervalidated. Like if you change the service, the example I've got here is maybe you change the service type from load balance or from a node port to load balancer. Does that really work? I'm not sure. Okay, so I have 2 chapters here. Chapter 1 is about the first document I sent around, which is sort of the half of the problem that I didn't really see people attempting to solve. And this is, I've called it user intent lifecycle management. Sounds fancy. So some examples of this category of problem: user posts, changes something, applies. You get a surprise because the post didn't record your last applied state. You do an apply, you do an edit or a get, edit, put cycle, and apply again. Your apply does a bunch of things you didn't expect. You do a get, edit locally, and apply. You're surprised because you take over a bunch of fields that were defaulted and you didn't really intend to own. Well, now you own them. You tweak some annotations, like say the last applied state annotation, and very strange things happen. And lastly, if one user applies something and then another user applies something else that's unrelated to the first thing, very strange things will happen because the last applied state is not related to the thing that the second user is applying. So why is it hard? We know it must be hard because there's a bunch of smart people that have been working on it for the past 2 years, and yet there's still a bunch of bugs. So I came up with two sort of primary reasons that are preventing us as a group from solving it. I think the practical reason is that there's just too much stuff out there you have to change to get a fix in. You have to change the client, you have to change the schema, you have to fix strategic merge patch, you have to fix maybe server components, and you have to wait for a 2-release deprecation period. This is a lot of stuff you have to do to get a simple fix out. And the second one is, and that stuff is because it's located in different components, like there's a limited number of people that understand all the various components well enough to easily make a change like that. And sort of the other problem is, as in Brian's terms, organic evolution and the lack of a systematic approach. And I think there hasn't been an overall a shared understanding of what this feature is attempting to accomplish. And so some fixes have gone in one direction and some have gone in another direction, and together we're just not delivering a cohesive feature. So I hope to fix that problem directly with the design doc that I published. So let's talk a little bit about the actual proposal. I listed out, I think I got them all on this slide. I listed out the sort of high-level bits of what we're proposing. We're proposing, obviously, we move the apply logic into the control plane, a new apply verb. A apply verb is going to be a subset of the, well, I'll talk about that verb in a moment. Track a last applied state per client ID, so multiple appliers. Last applied annotation, move it to a field in metadata out of the annotation. Give errors on conflicts, but allow users to override if necessary. Detect a number of cases where manifests have gone through the wrong user workflow. We would like to detect as much of that as possible. And we'll have to add some extensions to open API schemas in order to support this.
What is a client ID? I don't know that concept.
Yeah, I think, do I have a slide on that? I don't have a slide on that. So it is not a security boundary concept. It is a maybe it'd be better as like a workflow identifier key, right? So if you're applying something that's tracked in your source control, no matter who applies it, that all needs to work off of the same last applied annotation. If maybe actor is an okay term.
It sounds like it doesn't sound like an actor, right? It sounds like if I'm working on something from source control and you're working on something in the source control, you expect the client ID to be the same.
Right.
Okay, so it's not an actor. Can you try to crisp up? Is it provided by a client? Is it provided by a server?
Yeah, if you read the doc, there's actually 3 places, which obviously it's subject to change, but there's 3 places that this can be derived from. I suggest allowing people to just set it directly as a field in metadata, so that if you want to ensure that everyone working off of the same source control system uses the same client ID, you can accomplish that just by putting it in. I suggest further allowing it to be a query parameter. So if it's not provided by the manifest, it can be provided by the infrastructure calling kubectl apply. And lastly, if neither of those are set, I suggest the server can deduce it from user agent.
So the reason why I suggested actor, David, is because the canonical example here is, you have multiple actors that are coming together to put together both the spec and the status of a particular resource. So it could be the person with kube control that's actually putting some stuff out there. You could have auto scaling that's actually going through and acting on it. You have somebody doing defaults. You have a mutating webhook that's going through and adding a bunch of stuff to a particular pod template, that type of thing. And so you can see how like there's multiple actors that are all going through to construct the final form of the resource. And so that's really what client ID is which person is actually doing which part of the, a certain layer or certain merge.
That's what I thought. That's not what Daniel described.
Yeah, it maps okay. When you're thinking about automated systems, it maps well, the actor maps well, but when you're thinking about just the parts that users interact with, then it's really identifying the workflow and not the person running control apply.
Yeah, so you don't want it to be the authentication user,
yes,
right?
You definitely do not want it to be the same as the user that you're authenticating as. Okay.
We need a better term there.
yeah. At first, I had user key. Maybe I'll float the idea of a workflow identifier or something like that.
You call it like apply key or something like that.
Yeah, key. Yeah, I don't know.
Yeah.
Anyway, we can debate that in the document. So the future of this is, hold on, my various Zoom windows are covering up this part of my slide. Other API verbs can interact with applied states. This is because we track it in the control plane, so we can make, say, patch or get put produce warnings when you're setting fields that somebody else thinks they're managing. So we could maybe even re-implement patch in terms of apply. I think apply, if we implement it like this, is just strictly superior to patch. So we can think about migrating controllers and maybe eventually deprecating the strategic merge patch format.
Strategic merge patch is not our only patch.
I agree. And other patch formats are
different.
None of them are great, but strategic merge patch is particularly egregious in that it's kind of homegrown and ad hoc.
Yes, but I'm just saying that if you make a replacement for strategic merge patch, which I could imagine something doing, that replacement is not likely to be a replacement for a JSON patch.
Yeah, I think that could be an entire discussion of this length.
Yeah, let's put that as a non-goal for now.
Sure. I don't foresee the patch verb going away, but I do think that most people who are currently calling strategic merge patch will be better off if they were calling apply. But they can't right now because we don't track multiple appliers. And primarily it's controllers calling strategic merge patch. So benefits of moving it all in one place is bug fixes are like 98% server side, and you don't have to worry about clients nearly as much. And lastly, and it's bolded, we can execute apply calls from clients other than kubectl and languages other than Go, which is really critical. Okay, we're running low on time, so I don't know if I want to go through each of these in agonizing detail. Let's see. So I have more about the apply verb, more about multiple appliers, which we mostly covered that.
Do you have an example of what you see the metadata that you described being added looking like?
Not in these slides.
Last applied state. So you're going to have a string of apply ID to whatever they chose to apply.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. If you're talking about that, I thought you were talking about the client ID. Yeah, this is not a super concrete API proposal. This is just to get the idea across. Yeah, so it would be basically a map from the client ID or user key or actor or workflow identifier, whatever we want to call it, to the actual object that they sent. If you read my doc, I argue that this should roughly double the size of our objects, because the case where multiple people list the same field should be rare. And probably one of those people is doing it wrong. So it should about double the size. I don't think that's too bad. And we can actually if we track it, not tracking it in an annotation lets us do something like compress it. So it could be better than that.
Yeah,
So
we can definitely press it.
This client ID or the apply ID, I see a map here. My immediate thought is personally identifying information. How are we going to prevent that from being an issue? Like I would know now, everyone.
So I agree that there is a risk there, but I have two thoughts. The first is we already have this problem with secrets. If you apply to create a secret, you get the entire secret in an annotation, which is...
That's different than knowing who is acting on it.
You're worried about the workflow identifier itself being PII?
It's not, since you haven't described how you're building it and you have described it in a way where a server is deriving it based off of, you said user agent.
Yeah, user agent should be something like kubectl apply, not like Bob at, you know.
Okay, I guess then I would look at that and say that's probably not going to be unique enough to do what you want this to do.
So we've got a fine line to walk there between providing useful defaults and making users learn a concept.
I mean, I agree, but a value that doesn't do what we need it to do, it doesn't help them in either case, right? And then one that's very specific has other...
So there's actually some argument about this in the doc. Eric thinks that it should default to something like kubectl apply under the assumption that if two people are applying the same object, they're working off the same source file because they'd be insane otherwise. And his reasoning is that workflow is much more common than the workflow where two people are trying to manage separate aspects of the same object, both with apply. I mean, that doesn't actually even work today. Okay, some questions.
Why would we actually keep the last applied state in the metadata, which will be sent back and forth to users and to the server, when only the actual actor that cares about the last applied state is the apply method on the server? I doubt that any client will be interested in seeing, oh, there's like this many different applied states.
I have two answers for that. One is tracking it in metadata as a first-class citizen makes it easier and more straightforward for other server verbs to use that information to provide like warnings or helpful error messages. The other is that without supplying the state as a visible object, the apply operation becomes dependent on hidden state. Like what you'd apply will do different things depending on what is in that last applied annotation. So it needs to be introspectable. You can also, using this information, look at an object and identify which component is managing which fields. Like if you're wondering whether HPA is actually touching your replicas field, you can look at the object and see if there's a thing in there. It also, if a user tries to apply an object which has this field set, then we know that the user must have done a get and edited something and reapplied it, and we can tell them, hey, it looks like you used this wrong workflow. You can't do that. Okay, hold on. There's a ton of questions in the comments. Should I?
So I think so. The question I was asking is, that's a map. Why is it not a list? And I think there's two models.
It could be a list. It's not an important distinction at this.
Well, no, because a list implies order, and that order could actually. So the question is, do we prevent two things from having this, or do we let them have the same field and we have a deterministic way to actually determine who overwrites whom?
Yeah, we allow people to both mention the same field. If you look in the doc, there's a fairly precise set of rules for who wins. I have the concept of a field manager, and when you make a change, and somebody else has it in their list, under what circumstances do you become the manager, and under what circumstances do you not become the manager?
I'll have to read more.
Yeah, it's a little fiddly, because it's hard to design a system that does the right thing in most of the cases. Which, if it were easy, we wouldn't be having this conversation, right? So I think one important thing to catch here is I'm not trying to manage a series of patches that are applied in a certain order to construct the live state. I'm not trying to do that. The last applied state is a historical record of what various workflows have attempted to do. So whenever a new one comes in, at that point, the live state is modified accordingly. But we don't reconstruct the live state from first principles by adding up all the things in this list.
Wait, so, but I mean, could you take that last applied state map and reconstruct the true sort of state of the object?
I don't think you can, because the true state of the object is going to depend on the order in which the patches were applied. And there's also, until I think eventually we'll probably take stuff from defaults and mutating webhooks and put that in as its own records, just for visibility. But until we do that, there's sources of changes that wouldn't come through the apply system. So
that smells bad to me.
I think, I think the build a stack of patches that add up to a certain thing is order dependent, and then you have a problem where what if you want to change the one in the middle and the actors that produced later ones aren't online to see if they need to change their thing in response to your thing. So I'm just not trying to solve that problem. Schema. We will need some schema additions. I am over my allotted time, so I will put it on this slide. Super ambitious goal, Alpha 111. I think this is a large change that affects a lot of the system. I'm thinking maybe a feature branch is going to be a good idea for something on this order. Otherwise, I don't know how we're going to be able to work together to put it together. But if anyone has ideas, let me know.
So I have two general questions. One, seems like a follow-up to this meeting specific to this topic would be useful to schedule.
So what what aspect? Do you want, like a design review or?
Yeah, maybe a design review for this group, specifically how it interacts with kube control and what you are planning to do to modify kube control in a way that won't force us. So it's going to be alpha at best in 111 if we can't have the standard apply command do that as a default.
Yeah, so I'm not because of that, I'm not anticipating kube control changes in 111.
So our experience in server-side printing is that if you don't have an option for it, and off by default, but if you don't have an option for it, you get very little. It's very hard for people to work with it, and so they don't.
You mean we won't get any feedback on whether it's useful?
Yeah, but with the case of the server-side printing, we added the option only when we reached the beta, and if the apply will be alpha in 111, I don't know.
Yeah, I guess
on the other hand, I do expect this to be pretty easy to implement from the client side. Like you could do it with curl.
Yeah, we could do an alpha apply command or an alpha flag to the existing apply command.
Yeah, like literally the body of the thing that you send to the apply verb is going to be just the file on disk, so it should be very easy.
There's going to be other questions related to it, like what is it going to do to edit, and and other pieces of human interaction like that.
Yeah. So again, I hope to make the changes server side, right? So you do an edit which affects a field that apply is managing, and the server says, hey, you're affecting this field that apply is managing.
Yeah,
I think it's a good point. We have to update edit as well, though, because it has to change its patch mechanism, exactly. Right?
And so there's details to this that are specific to kube control. I think that reading through it,
and I'm going to be leaning on Phil and other people here to help with that. I've primarily been thinking about the server side.
Yeah, that makes sense. I think we'll probably want to like touch base several times during the course of development, just because of how complicated this change will be.
Yeah. Okay, so there is a second half of the slide deck, which I won't go through now, but I will circulate the second design and these slides around the SIG later today. I hope to represent these slides at SIG API Machinery in a couple hours. That'll be my third time doing this. Yeah, so look at the design docs. Please give me feedback. Yeah.
Thanks, Daniel. That was awesome.
Thank you.
Okay, let's move to the second item, server-side printing. It looks like there are several items related to printing stuff.
Yeah, that's true. So the first one is pretty short. We've managed to enable the server-side printing flag on the client. The server side is currently moved to beta. There's an experimental server-side flag that you can use with the kubectl get that will return with that will work with the server-side printing. It will return hopefully the exactly same values as you would normally with kubectl get. I'm currently working on adding more tests that will ensure that whatever we define for the server-side printing is actually working properly on the client. I have a PR open, adding this test and fixing several places that I've already identified when writing the tests. So with all these pieces, I'm hoping to gather some more feedback around the structure, and the further topics are actually a follow-up to what I just said, and I'm going to pass over to Juan, who will give you some more details on the topic.
Thanks. So basically, like Matt just said, we did enable, or we did add an experimental flag for users to test server-side printing. It is off by default, and some issues we found while implementing this on the client side was that sorting would not work the way it's currently implemented with a tabular response from the server. So I have pasted a link to a Google Doc detailing this further, so I'll skim over it. But basically, with sorting, we are proposing creating a new sorter that specifically knows how to sort table responses from a server. The reason for this is because whereas before, when you requested a list of objects from the server, each object was essentially embedded in its own info. With a table, the table itself is embedded in an info, and the table itself contains a row for each object. So with the new sorter, we're proposing essentially breaking out each row into its own table and sorting all of the resulting tables such that we want to persist the current behavior of sorting. So today you can have mixed resource kinds, all sorted regardless of what kind they are, if you sort by name, for example.
Okay. Well, let's start there. Do we consider that a feature or a bug? So if I request services and pods, and I want to sort by name, do I expect to get all my pods sorted by name and then all my services sorted by name, or do I expect an interleaved list?
Currently, you're going to get interleaved list.
That's what it currently does.
Yes.
We should decide whether that's a feature or a bug.
The application kept may help address some of the use cases for selecting from multiple things anyway. So it's probably worth thinking about what the specific use cases for selecting from multiple things are.
Yeah,
Answer that question.
behavior isn't to me.
How does the application KEP interact here? I'm really confused.
Well, like, so one reason to select multiple things is if you want to get all your deployments, your stateful sets, your replica sets, and your daemon sets, right? Because you want to know, like, what are all the workloads I have running and what are all my applications, right? And so the application KEP is really about, like, unifying multiple pieces or providing abstractions that are higher level, right? So in that case, you no longer need to select deployments and stateful sets to figure out your things. You just ask for the applications.
Right. I think, but just in my mind, you know, an application is a higher level concept that really isn't part of Kubernetes core. And so I like seeing applications be a CRD that's sort of a layered concept on top of core Kubernetes. But the idea of, hey, I want to be able to like extract a bunch of information and display it, whether it be like show me all the objects that have this label set or whatever. I don't think we want to predicate this on the application KEP, right?
I think we need to think about what use case we're trying to solve here. Yes, like maybe if the use case is about selecting all your applications, like we shouldn't be trying to solve that problem. But
I mean, but this is the thing is that at some point we want to display a whole bunch of resources. Sometimes we have one way of describing.
Maybe take a step back. Joe, what do you think the use case is for this sorting and selecting multiple things?
So right now I do kube control get all, and I don't get all, but what I do get actually shows me multiple things. Or I'm doing something, I'm like, I want to show a deployment plus all the downstream objects from that. So I know that, okay, I want to show the deployment plus the replica sets plus the pods that all have the same label. So there's two examples.
When do you want those sorted?
I think you want to sort based on type and then name, but that's me.
That's what occurs to me as well.
I think you actually want a topological sort where the
We've done that in OpenShift. That's not what kube control get does.
Yeah, I know. I just in the problem space, if we already have all the parent pointers in the owner references, so you can start with the deployment and then build a tree from there.
Do we even need this feature?
Sorting
across multiple things?
That's what my question is. I think I heard Juan talk about it, and then it leaped out as I don't think I want that. And I would say what it currently does today is a bug because I wouldn't expect it to happen. So I could reduce my problem space by saying that's just not a thing.
Yeah, instead of picking an arbitrary problem to solve, maybe we should just not solve the problem.
Especially that you can always pipe the result to the sort command and then get whatever you care about and the way that you care about.
This isn't saying, I guess my statement isn't that I don't want sorting at all. It's that I don't want sorting with interleaved resources. That's just, I think, a quirk and a bug of what the current implementation does.
That's fine. What about the case where, which is connected to this one, what about the case when you want to sort by a field that is not existent in all the resources that you are getting? Let's say I'm going to sort by, I don't know, pod phase, which will obviously exist only in pods. Are you getting pods first sorted by the pod phase and all the other resources not sorted at the end? That seems
I think we should support sorting, but I think this is a good question. It's like, do we really want to support sorting across multiple types for like the complex reasons just mentioned?
Well, the complexity is already there. Currently will happen what I just said. If you have a non-existent field, the sorter will silently ignore the problem of not getting the field that you care about, and it will just move to the end the resources that it cannot sort, and will sort only those that are available. But I totally agree that we could simplify the sorting just a single resource, because it does make sense for a single resource, and it's obvious how it will work. And given by the discussions that we're currently having, multi-resource sorting is a problem just by the fact that we have so many different options, and the same will apply to users, because different users will have different expectation on how the sorting will happen when applied to multiple resources.
So I know I'm keep asking the same question, but does anyone know the concrete use cases of why people need to sort across multiple object types? Like, what are you doing? Like Joe said, he wants to list a bunch of stuff. Is sorting an important aspect of that use case?
Name and age. Those are the two that I know of and the two that I use. And
so if it's really just name, if it's name and age, like we might want to restrict like what we allow sorting on or something like that, instead of like just minimize to the use cases we know that are real.
So there's additional problem to that, which goes into do we want to, in case of a server-side printing, we return a certain amount of data for every single resource, and then we can additionally include the entire object. So this complicates the sorting up to a point where you can either specify the column name, because currently, if you want to sort by something, you have to specify JSON path to the field that you're seeing, which is not, you can't come up with this idea easily. You need to know the field's JSON path to get the name. If with the server-side printing, we could go, we can simplify the sorting by allowing the user to specify the name of the column that are being printed, and only fall back to the JSON path if he cares more about it. But we could actually entirely get rid of the JSON path and only sort by the default columns that are returned by the server-side printing.
I think the first question to answer is, are we willing to restrict what sort by can do? It can do a certain number of things today. Are we willing to restrict it in the next release or the release after that in a way that some users may be unhappy with? That's going to be one question for us to answer. And then once you've decided on that, deciding whether sorting is a client-side activity or a server-side activity is an important next step. There are arguments to be had both ways, right? Returning the correct order from the server makes it easier on clients. However, it limits that client, right? If custom columns are computed client-side based on the return of the data, then it becomes natural to want to sort on your custom columns if we are not going to restrict people. So are we prepared to answer those questions now, or does it need to go to the mailing list?
So here's the proposed solution to that. I'm hoping to enable the server-side printing by default in 1.12. With the server-side printing, we need to use the new sorting mechanisms, but we will still provide the fallback for, I don't know, probably even up to 2 releases for the old printing. In that case,
why do we have to use server-side sorting with server-side printing? Like,
we don't have to.
Item is one. I mean, those things could be split, right?
No. What I'm saying is,
that's true. Paginate shit.
Yeah.
And I think the part of the point of server-side printing is to allow like JavaScript clients and Java clients and all these other folks to all rely on the same behavior.
Yeah, so if we're willing to restrict what you can do in sort by and say you can sort by metadata and the server will do it for you, then that's a very simple statement for us to make. It is restrictive. And the SIG may get unhappy emails. So we would want to consider that carefully.
Are you talking about sorting for everything? Not just the multi-item case.
Right. I'm saying sorting for everything, not just the multi-item case. Would we be willing to restrict it? That would make it really easy to support server side. If we're not, it gets harder.
It'd be a lot easier to answer that question if we had data.
Yeah. So in API machinery, we have, with limited success, posted to our mailing list. And there was a Twitter poll for various things.
Well, I would propose ending up with a information to the Kubernetes dev, not just the SIG internal. That has a broader audience. And then if there are no objections, proceed with the server-side sorting, and have that one enabled in the next release, along with the server-side printing by default, with a possibility to fall back. And if we keep that for, I don't know, 2 releases, in the worst case, we will be getting feedback, bad feedback, but we will get the feedback, whether the limitation that we introduce are bearable or are problematic, and how many people are actually affected. Because that's, in the majority of cases, that will be what will happen in most cases. That people will start complaining only when they hit the problem. Yeah, and I agree with what Joe said. Many clients will end up doing their own sorting regardless. Although in case of the pagination, you still expect that you're gonna get, I don't know, 50 first pods and not randomly return values for pods. So pagination and sorting does make sense.
I think the pagination scenario is really interesting. I think there's probably a scenario where people are listing a lot of things, and for server-side sorting makes a ton of sense. I think for a lot of clients, they're just going to want, it doesn't matter if there's 500 items, that's still pocket change. They're going to want to be able to load all that in pagination. It's just a way to make the
I happen to know how pagination is implemented. It is not going to play nice with an attempt to sort. Right? Pagination works by leveraging etcd features, and you don't have, at least to my knowledge, a way to introspect the actual items for sorting. So you may be able to sort based on key, but there's no way you'd be able to sort based on...
Yeah, I think pagination is only going to give you stuff out of etcd order unless we can drive the sort routine down into etcd.
And I don't know that we have appetite for that. So
I don't have an appetite for that.
Wait, so does this mean that this is all moot, since like really true server-side sorting in a sort of paginated way is kind of not going to happen regardless?
I think we might need to decide how important it is to us. Like it can be, anything can be done with enough effort, but is this worth the effort?
No one's crying for this now, right?
But so the other question is that there's this. The previous question was like, how do you do? I mean, it's like, how do you do sorting when you have a query that covers multiple types, right? Do we need to have a single query cover multiple types? Would it be easier? Because again, now the question is, with pagination, how do you play it? Do you do one type and then paginate and then do the next type, or do you interleave them? What the hell do you do?
Does server-side GET support multiple types at the moment?
No, it doesn't. The way it happens is you get the returns back, and the client gets to decide what it's going to do.
Okay.
As I recall it, GET actually pulls and then repeatedly pulls for the entire list in order to get what its current use cases.
That seems good to me. I'm very scared of adding something to the server that adds a bunch of fan out. I think we should be talking very carefully about that.
So,
okay, I'm guessing this is decided that we are leaving only the client-side sorting and try to limit the scope significantly to only the metadata.
So I think
With the
It sounds really hard for me to understand. Anyone else having that problem?
Yeah, same here.
Sorry, you're having trouble understanding me?
Yeah. There you go. You were better that time. I'm betting you were saying something like, if we do it client side, then we can decide what restrictions make sense with regard to sorting across multiple resources, and the options may be different between multiple resources and a single resource.
Yeah, that's it. Thanks.
So I can go ahead and I'll update the proposal. So, but just to clarify, and we're all on the same page, we would be sorting, in the case of multiple resource types received by the client, we would be sorting by type first, and then we would sort the list of resources per type. Does that sound correct?
Yes.
Okay.
And if you specify a sort by and you specify multiple resources, your sort by must be inside of metadata. It cannot be a field inside of your
Yes.
object. That change needs to have something sent to mailing list to describe to people that it is coming and under what conditions they will be hit and why this change is going to happen.
Okay, that makes sense. So I'll go ahead and update the proposal and send it to the mailing list along with.
Oh, and to be clear, the change is not happening just because of server-side printing. We found it in server-side printing, but the inconsistent behavior on sorting is a problem that we had in general. And I don't want people to be confused.
Makes sense. So with that being said, go ahead.
So I was going to say, I mean, there might be a scenario, and this is something worthwhile, of documenting or at least being clear of like, hey, if you do a kube control get of a certain form, you'll get pagination and you'll get streaming behavior. So I think there's a difference between sort of a pretty get versus a streaming get, and we may want to tease that apart and be more clear about that, because there are going to be scenarios where people want to list stuff with like, a gazillion things and they want true paging, right? So that's probably a feature request for kube control. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it makes sense to me. And it is important to distinguish, I think, which things are being caused by server-side get and which things are being exposed by server-side get. And they are two distinct lists. I think that's time.
Yeah. Oh, but we still have one more item, CLI testing guideline.
There are three more topics, actually, but I doubt we are able to discuss it thoroughly today. It's a little bit longer topic, and the testing and the generators are another topic. I think we can leave it off for the next SIG CLI. It's a bigger topic that I want to discuss. Same applies for the printers and the kubectl bits that I need updates as well. Okay, sounds good. And can you put a doc there so people can read that before the meeting? Yeah, I will. I'll try and I'll ensure that we have this agenda stuff being announced a little bit before, which brings me back to the topic that Philip brought up 2 weeks ago with regards to co-leadership. Philip, you're still on?
I'm here. I don't know if you can hear me.
That here.
Yeah. Okay. Now you can hear better. So I think I can volunteer myself to co-lead the SIG CLI. I went through the docs that you mentioned 2 weeks ago. I don't know. I want to keep the discussion for the next time, or or you can proceed in the meantime.
No, that sounds good to me. If you want to just start taking on the responsibilities, maybe you can lead the next SIG CLI meeting.
Okay.
And then, yeah, we'll figure out for the remaining stuff. I think for the next release, once we get closer to the release, you can help with some of the responsibilities tied to that.
Yeah, that would be good.
Okay, go ahead and file a CAP or PR to update it. Would you actually just send an email out to the SIG CLI list, just letting everyone know that this change has been proposed and is like considered accepted?
Okay, will do.
Okay, I think that's it. Thanks everyone. See you next time.
Yeah, thanks very much. Bye-bye.
Bye.